Subaru just... he just got fucked. Like... oh my god, that was horrific. That was a horrific ending segment of this episode. Like, of all the things so far from ReZero, I think this was one of the most gruesome parts. Not because of the gore, but because of how it was done. Definitely that entire ending segment, like after the ending song, which I'll get into everything else in a part of this episode, like the ending song and stuff. But everything after that ending song, whoever worked on that scene, they have some talent. They have some really good talent. Because the camera angles were way better than anything so far from this series, but also the way it was used to build up that tension, but also when you saw his desperate cry for help as he was puking his guts out. The angles through the windows to the scene when he was laying on the ground, when he was going up the stairs, just all of these different camera angles. It really built that scene properly. Now, I'm stunned, because that entire scene was probably one of the best sequences, or I guess segments, of this anime season I've seen. Like, I'm not counting JoJo, and I'm not counting Boku no Hero Academia, because I expect those series to be really good. But in terms of everything else, ReZero, that segment right there is definitely in the top moments of this season, because the team that worked on that part alone really put in a lot of effort to showcase how ReZero can be brutal and what to expect from the rest of the series. And it wasn't just brutal to be brutal like some manga do. For instance, they go off killing everybody, cutting people's heads off and shit, and that's just GG, and you see blood scatter everywhere. But it wasn't really all about the gore. It was actually more of setting the tone of the episode, or the series, because Subaru, he's sitting here the entire episode, he's retracing his steps of what he did in the previous episode. He's doing everything he possibly can to make sure he goes down the exact same path that he did in the last time he did this. And so he wants to see exactly what's going to happen. So he kind of assumed he might die, but he's going to try to stop it. Of course, no man wants to die, but he was going to try to stop it. So he tackled it head on. And if this is going to be taken as if, you know, it's a different playthrough or like a different checkpoint, like a new spawn, usually if you're playing a game, you will die over and over to learn something. Like Dark Souls. Dark Souls is a perfect example. You go up against a boss, you fight that boss, you fucking die usually most of the time, but until you learn the moveset of that boss, and then you can win. And that's kind of what Subaru was doing in this episode. He was retracing his steps, doing everything he did, but then learning from his experiences. Like, if he knows what's going to happen, he should be able to counter what is going to happen. But that was the big mindfuck with this episode, because it wasn't a person, or actually there probably was a person that attacked him, but from our viewpoint as the anime onlys, I haven't read the original source, but as anime onlys, you don't know what the fuck is going on. Obviously some form of magic or something is going on, but we don't really know what is going on. Now, the easiest choice here, looking at everything, it looks like the dog might have made Subaru sick, where he was vomiting. Now, that's the obvious choice, or the answer to this outcome of this episode, because you had it to where right before Subaru started feeling nauseous and started puking, and then, you know, he was asking for help and all that, and then he had limbs cut off and stuff, which I'll get into that scene in a second. But it makes us assume that maybe the dog bite is what got him sick, and why he was puking, and maybe it was something completely different that was killing him later on in that scene. But I don't believe so, because if we retrace our steps, if this is from a person and someone casted magic or something on Subaru, it makes me assume maybe the reason why Subaru died to begin with, like why he died in the previous run, is probably because he choked to death on his own puke. I'm willing to bet it, because I mean, if he was laying backwards like he was doing, and he passed out, and he was getting tired, like you saw throughout the entire sequence, that he was getting very, very tired. Like, it seemed like he was having a really rough time staying awake. He was like this. He was like dozing off, trying to fight sleep, and like he was really wide awake. He was wide awake, but then all of a sudden, it just, he starts doing this. He's getting tired, and then all of a sudden he starts puking. So, it made me assume that he choked on his own vomit. Like, when he went to sleep and maybe someone casted some sleep spell or something on him, and when he puked in his sleep, and he died. And it didn't require necessary violence and gore like we saw in this episode. So it was kind of like a little bit different because he kind of fought back. So probably the killer, whoever tried to make him sick, if it wasn't the dog, had to finish him off because he was calling for help. Because, honestly, maybe he wouldn't have died if he would have just continuously puked. I mean, it would have made him dehydrated, but maybe he could have found someone in time to save him. But because he was getting closer and closer to finding someone, they finished him off. The question is, who killed him? Because we know someone had to kill him. Someone sliced his fucking arm off, and it fell into a damn cup. That shit was... Oof. Damn, the angle of that when he looks up and he sees his arm in a fucking cup. Oh my god, dude. Oh my god. That scene was so gruesome. Like, he didn't even realize. And that's like how pain works. I mean, there's been examples in news stories and stuff where someone will have their entire hand just completely fucking chopped off. And then there's blood squirting out and shit, but they're like... They don't feel it, because there's so much adrenaline and shit pumping through, they don't feel it, but then they look down like, holy fuck, my arm is gone, and they start feeling pain, and that's what I think happened to Subaru. He had so much pressure on him, he was puking everywhere, and when he got hit, he wasn't even realizing what was going on, his adrenaline was pumping because he wanted to survive, and then he looks up and he sees his arm, he's like, holy fuck, it's gone, and then you hear a skull bone-crushing sound at the end of the episode's over, and I'm like, yo, that's some brutal shit. So, what killed him? Well, obvious answer is the dog, but I don't believe it's the dog. So, magic. Magic is something that we do know exists in this series. We've seen it. We've seen examples of this. So, it's not off the table that there's supernatural going on here. We do know that there's different creatures other than humans in this series. Now, one thing to really point out that this episode tried to imply was that the maid sisters might be demons. Because you had it to where Subaru, he was talking to one of the sisters, the blue-haired one, and was like, oh, I like demons. You know, they're willing to have a laugh with you and all that, but, you know, gods don't really do that. So it's implying that the way she smiled, that she might be something along the lines of a demon. Maybe a succubus, maybe a demon, something. Just something similar to a demon. Something unhuman. So this kind of clarifies that these maids might have some form of magical abilities. So it's making us assume it might be them too causing it. Because as you know, in the last week's episode, it seemed like they might have been doing something. But I don't believe that is the case. It might be something else going on here. I mean, it could be them. I have no idea. Because throughout majority of the episode, it seemed like they were rather nice. They were getting along well. They seemed like everything was completely fine. I mean, Subaru was learning. They went out of their way to teach him reading and writing, which is the segment I want to talk about, actually, because I talked about this briefly in one of my main parts of my last review of ReZero. Subaru, as I said, he has access to a very strong library compared to anyone else. He can look up forbidden magic that no one else knows about. And since in this episode he was learning how to read and write, and we know he can carry his memories from his previous life, we know he can use that to his advantage to continuously learn how to read and write, and be able to eventually read those complicated books. Because, I mean, like I've said, this man has pretty much infinite time on his hands. From our understanding, he can die over and over as many times as he wants. He just needs to figure out how to get the fuck out of it. So, we don't know exactly the limits to his ability of how he constantly resets to a spawn point or a checkpoint or whatever. So, the main thing is like, now since he has so much time on his hands, he can learn every situation, but also he can use this to learn magic. And then he can use magic in upcoming shit like this. Like, what if he would have, like, let's say, a magical dispel or something, or a barrier? He could have put up a fucking barrier and it would have stopped his arm from being flung off, or maybe he had a dispel to stop him from puking. There's many things here. So, with him learning the ability to read and write, it makes it more likely that he will go into that library since he can find it to be able to read those books. And I feel like Beatrice is the missing link here. I feel like she is, because the way she acted in this episode, there was one thing that was really off. She didn't have many lines in this episode, but her personality was very different from how it was kind of shown in the previous episode. For instance, Beatrice was very mean, aggressive, okay? And Subaru wasn't the best, obviously, towards her. But she was aggressive. But in this episode, he walks up and she kind of is a little bit passive towards him. I mean, she's a little bit mean, passive-aggressive, but overall, it was a lot more nicer than how it was in the previous episode. And then there was a scene that was very quick, but it definitely had some form of weight to this episode. She looks out the window, looks at our main character, and then doesn't really say nothing, but she looks at, you know, Puck, and you're like, okay, so that's pretty much it. So, I feel like Beatrice, she might be the missing link here. Either A, she's the one causing this, and she's the one probably killing the main character, or B, she knows what's going on. One or the other. Because she is a mythical beast or something that is magical. We know she's not human. She's probably a vampire or something. So, she might have the answer to this. And if Subaru breaks down and says something, maybe she will understand. Who knows? I feel like she's going to be very helpful in the future events of the series, since she has access to the library. Now, overall, though, talking about the other segments of this episode, we have some beautiful moments, comedy moments. I mean, Subaru learning from his mistakes in the previous episode, taking it to use it to his advantage. He's taken the skills he learned from maids to his advantage to be even better in this, but he was still rather clumsy. And there was some very subtle differences, especially when it came to sewing and stuff like that. But overall, he pretty much did the exact same thing he did in the previous episode, but from a different angle. It mainly focused on giving more characterization to Rim, hopefully that's her right name, giving more characterization to her and allowing us to know more about her personality. So yeah, tell me your thoughts in the comments below. How do you all feel about this week's episode of ReZero? An intense episode. Can't wait to see where it's going to go after this. Love you all so much. You have a wonderful day or night wherever you live. Please be safe. Chibi out.